What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. League of Legends has definitely gone through a ton of growth over the years that it's been around, and part of that growth was Riot kinda learning more about what kind of mechanics they found to actually be a good fit for the game, and which ones were kinda influencing gameplay in a pretty negative way. And Riot have been pretty clear about the kinds of mechanics that they definitely want to avoid putting into the game in future champions and reworks, but a lot of you guys might not know that probably a lot of these mechanics had actually originally once existed as part of the game and removed in earlier versions of League of Legends. Most of the mechanics we found that have been removed were taken out of the game way back as early as Season 1 in beta, so hopefully there's some that you guys didn't know about or just find interesting, and we've definitely cooked up a pretty awesome list of just some old mechanics that I thought were interesting. And if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, and if you don't, you know what, feel free to hit that dislike. And if this video hits, let's say 4,000 ratings, then I'll see if I can dig up some other mechanics and make a second episode of this idea. Either way, let's jump right into it. So the first mechanic on our list today was tagged on Garen's spin to win ability on his E called Judgment. Now AoE abilities or skill shots have pretty much always been able to hit invisible enemy champions if you actually manage to land on them, since invisibility would actually be kind of broken if it also gave them invulnerability. Now one mechanic that Judgment used to have though on Garen's E is that it could actually damage even invisible wards as well as those invisible enemy units. So if you warded a brush or maybe even an objective, Garen could just walk over, use his E, and then sweep that ward away with no problem whatsoever because the ward would get damaged by it as well. And this mechanic was actually removed on patch 103 during the early phases of Season 1, so it wasn't around when the majority of players became active, but it was actually a pretty real issue for players back in the alpha, beta, and early Season 1 because Garen could, he could just deny vision for free essentially, sometimes even accidentally almost, like if he was spinning onto an enemy champion and happened to hit a ward as collateral damage or something like that. The ability was changed to no longer hit any kind of invisible units other than champions, and Riot of course made sure to keep that being the case for future champion abilities since it was just so annoying to deal with. Second up, we're taking a look at an older teleport mechanic that a lot of you guys are probably going to be pretty happy was removed. So using teleport on a ward actually used to not reveal that ward, which made those super stealthy teleport ganks actually incredibly easy to pull off and honestly just flat out unfair. You would teleport to a ward and the animation would just be straight up invisible. And this was way back before Riot nerfed the teleport channel time as well. The mechanic wasn't even removed until Season 1, so if you're chilling in the bot lane, you'd have to just be super careful if the enemy top laner went missing because in a matter of seconds, they could just appear out of the bush and ruin your day. And this mechanic was removed from the game on patch 121, which made teleporting on a ward reveal that ward as well as the teleport animation to enemies for just a few seconds, so instead of having to keep removing wards or risk randomly dying in a gank, you'd actually know when someone was channeling that teleport on you. Teleport ganks even today are still pretty difficult to deal with, but now at least you have a little bit of a warning when it actually happens. Our next mechanic is another thing that actually got cancelled or removed from the game in Season 1. So on patch 100, a change went out to stop people from using mobility spells while they were rooted. And this is a change that actually affected every single mobility spell in the entire game. Before that, you could cast any movement related abilities like Ezreal's Arcane Shift, Kassadin's Ultimate, and you could cast any of those abilities while you were rooted specifically. It was only for roots, so you couldn't cast them while you were stunned or silenced or anything like that. But if you were rooted with abilities like Ryze's Rune Prison or Amumu's Ultimate, you could cast those mobility spells, and that meant that even if an enemy champion managed to lock you down, you could honestly kind of render the crowd control pretty much useless, because instead of being held in one position for a time, you could just dash or blink away to keep yourself alive until the root ended, and then you could just run away as usual. The only alternative to buffing roots and snares in this way would maybe just be to turn all those abilities into harder forms of crowd controls like stuns or something, but that does have a lot of balance issues on some champions kits, so it was a pretty good decision to just make it so that any kind of movement, including movement abilities, would just get permanently restricted during the duration of the root. Now the next mechanic we're taking a look at is something that's actually kind of similar to something that we took a look at the beginning of this video, and it's that abilities that revealed enemy champions or minions used to actually also be able to reveal wards as well. Now this mechanic only actually happened if a champion that was revealed by an ability that granted sight walked next to a ward, but essentially it worked by giving true sight of the target if they were hit with a reveal. And since it applied to the area as true sight rather than vision on impact, it would reveal wards if the ability had tagged a champion, giving a bit of free bonus information to the person that casted the ability. It happened on a number of different abilities before it was patched out in patch 4.15 actually back in season 4, and I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of a hint here. I did make a video on this mechanic in season 4, so I'm not gonna take credit for it, but I'm gonna take credit for it. They removed it because of my video, let's be honest here, of course. For real though, Riot probably just figured that being able to clear wards for free just because you happen to hit a champion or a minion near one was probably pretty unfair. Next up, we're taking a look at something that used to be on Blitzcrank. Now, Blitzcrank used to have a pretty negative mechanic attached to his rocket grab actually. He used to be able to pull objects like Shaco's Jack-in-the-Box or Teemo's Mushroom as long as he hit them before they actually became invisible. And the same actually used to happen to Anivia's Crystallize. A well-placed wall could actually shift the location of a Shaco box before it was changed in patch 123 of season 1. More often than not, it was actually a pretty bad thing. Like, it would actually kind of suck if you pulled a Teemo Shroom into your team and just ended up killing someone with the area of effect or just dealing a bunch of damage. Now, Blitzcrank can still have his hook blocked with a well-timed box or Shroom. Now it just doesn't actually pull that trap thing towards him anymore, so he doesn't end up taking the damage and proccing the trap instantly. For the next mechanic, it's something that I thought was kind of interesting, and it's an ability or sort of thing that kind of used to exist on Corki. Now, Corki has had his Phosphorus Bomb on his Q for a really long time, but it also used to have one additional mechanic that was actually extremely annoying to have to play against. Back in the day, if Corki hit an enemy with his Phosphorus Bomb, it actually used to give the target a debuff that gave them a miss chance, which was pretty much the old equivalent of a blind actually, until the blind mechanic was further developed. It actually used to be at 50%, so there would be a 50% chance of them being able to miss their auto attacks, but it was actually later removed because Corki was really overpowered at the time, and the mechanic was just too frustrating to play against. He was also hit with a ton of other nerfs around the end of the closed beta in early season 1, but this one might have actually hurt his laning phase even more than the reduction to his damage, because if you just think about that in like a 2v2 fight versus an AD carry, that kind of miss chance would actually be really powerful. It'd honestly be a pretty broken mechanic, although maybe not as bad as dodge since you can stack that stat, but it definitely wasn't fun to play against at all. Now the next mechanic we're taking a look at is something that I actually thought was really interesting and kind of just weird, and I think it might have just existed in the game like unintentionally almost, maybe. And essentially what it was is that Gangplank's Q used to deal magic damage unless it critically strike actually, in which case if it crit, it would deal physical damage. It's actually pretty weird, but it was probably done to make it so that the difference between landing a critical strike or landing a non-critical strike on the ability wasn't as big, because magic damage is definitely stronger than physical damage because it's more difficult to get magic resistance. It also could have been maybe because critical strikes at the time might have only been coded to work with physical damage, so maybe being an ability that could deal magic damage and they wanted the crits to deal magic damage but they just couldn't code it properly, and as a result crit might have been forced to deal physical damage. Either way, it ended up being fixed in season 1 on patch 74 by permanently changing Parlay's damage from magic to physical completely, regardless of whether or not it crit. Whether they changed crits themselves so that they could actually be magic damage or not, I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that magic damage can actually crit now, but it's definitely not as relevant as physical damage crits, so it's not really that big of a deal anyway. Now, a mechanic that we haven't seen a lot of, even though it might actually be decent for the game, is a targeted cleanse, something like Mikhail's Crucible, but on a champion ability. And back in the day, Morgana's Black Shield actually used to be able to function like this. It would cleanse debuffs on the target when you used it, as well as preventing them, making it actually a super awesome ability for helping save trapped allies, rather than risking using it on someone before they even got hit with a crowd control effect. The change made Black Shield more proactive, since if you're too late, you're probably just not going to block the crowd control anymore, but since it cleansed already applied debuffs at the time, it was way more forgiving overall back then, and of course it was a lot more powerful. And this mechanic was removed in Season 1 as well, which probably wasn't a bad idea at the time since Morgana has always been pretty strong, to be honest, but it might make a really cool skill for support in the future one day, although probably only cleansing the debuffs rather than cleansing and preventing them. It could definitely work as like a medium cooldown ultimate maybe on a support character. It's definitely a kind of ability that's been tested or potentially theory crafted for champions in the future. I know something was tested on a potential Alistar rework as well as on a potential Soraka rework, but they ended up just not making it into the game. But who knows? Riot's definitely trying to make that kind of ability work, so maybe we'll see it on a future champion or rework coming soon. Now the next mechanic we're taking a look at today is something that's actually kind of just funny, and it's one that the more careless players out there are definitely going to be happy was taken out of the game. So one resource that Riot occasionally likes to play with on champions is health costs. You know, instead of energy or mana, costs for an abilities that cost health. Champions like Mordekaiser, Dr. Mundo, and Olaf can all spend health to cast their abilities, which can of course definitely be a risk when you're low on health these days, but it actually used to be a lot worse, because if you use them on low life and you didn't have the actual amount of health needed to cast the ability, casting that ability that costed health would actually just straight up kill you. Olaf was actually kind of notorious for this one because it was so strong in the early game that you might just want to duel someone to the death at level 1 or level 2 using that reckless swing to deal a bunch of damage, but since it costs life to actually use the ability, one more swing on minions or something, maybe it nets you a kill. But since the ability actually costs life to cast in the first place, you know, you might think that one more swing could net you that kill, and you just end up accidentally killing yourself with the ability. So Riot changed it on patch 3.6 actually during Season 3 to make it so that you would just never commit suicide using any abilities that cost health. It'd definitely be pretty easy for them to just prevent players from being able to cast abilities that have health costs if maybe they just didn't have the health amount to pay for it. But with Olaf in specific, they actually really liked the way that he would kind of fight to the death and take really big risks. So they actually made it that with Olaf in specific, he could cast Reckless Swing with any amount of health, but it made sure that it would never cause Olaf to drop below 1 current health. So if you had like 5 HP, you could still cast the ability and you wouldn't kill yourself. You just go down to 1 HP. Definitely still a huge risk to use it, of course, because minion death or some random source of damage could definitely kill you, but at least Olaf's never going to be committing suicide, right? As well as the other champions that have abilities that cost health. Either way though, that's just about all the mechanics we could take a look at for today. There's probably a lot more other interesting mechanics that were taken out at League at some point, so if you guys maybe want to see another video like this in the future, definitely let us know in the comments section below, or maybe by dropping a like. And either way, looks like that's gonna be it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe if you want, if you enjoyed the video. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys next time.